Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this YouTube Live, where we'll be talking about all things studios and actual real-world texturing techniques. I'm Charlie. I'm the product manager of Mori, and if you don't know me, that means I get to do all of the cool stuff, like help decide where Mori goes, what features we do, but more importantly, I get to spend a lot of my time talking to not just the amazing Mori team, but you guys, the incredible users. So before we kick off our session today, I want to give our guest the chance to introduce himself. So Robert, can you tell us
Hi,
a little bit about who you are?
my name is Robert Smith, and I'm currently a CG supervisor at Atomic Cartoons and a huge fan of Mari. I've been using it since I think version 2.0. Yeah, I'm very excited to show you what we've done at Atomic to switch basically our entire texturing pipeline to Mari. So it's been working great so far. So yeah,
I
looking
love
forward
to
to
hear
hearing
that.
your questions at the end as well.
Yes, definitely. Do feel free to post your questions, your thoughts, your concerns into the chat as we go through. Part of the session today is pre-recorded just for quality purposes, as always, but we are here with you. We will be watching along. So do join us in the chat and we will join you in a little bit for the Q&A. See you.
Hello everyone and welcome to this Foundry YouTube Live. My name is Robert Smith and I am currently a CG supervisor at Atomic Cartoons, which is one of the biggest animation studios in Vancouver. I'm excited to show you the approach we took in our studio as we're shifting our workflows to make Mari the only package we're using in our texturing pipeline. But first, a little bit about myself. I've been involved with the CG industry since the early 2000s and I've spent the last 17 years doing VFX for feature films and TV series. Before my current role, I worked as head of CG supervisor, lead asset artist, and CG generalist at multiple VFX studios, most of them from Vancouver. I've also been teaching for the past 15 years at various VFX colleges throughout Canada, so I have first-hand experience with the challenges students face as they try to enter the animation, games, or VFX industry. Part of that challenge is to learn the process of texturing. I think it is the most artistically involved step in a pipeline, so to become a successful texture artist, one must develop a deep understanding of the texture painting process itself. As someone who has worked with all the main texturing packages, I can say that Mari is not only the most powerful and comprehensive one, but it's also the one that allows you to understand and explore the texture painting process like no other. If you ever painted model kits, Mari is about as close as you can get to that process inside a computer. It has been my go-to texturing package since version 2.0. This webinar is a summary of the journey through Mari our texture artists take to make them familiar with the software and help them better understand what it means to paint a texture map and get everything ready for the shading process. For this demo, I've chosen the Iron Man asset, which is the main character on one of our shows, and the reason that I chose him is one, because I'm a huge fan of Iron Man, and second, because this type of asset will allow me to showcase different painting techniques for both hard surface and organic surface. So in this case, if I go in here and I'm gonna hide his mask, you can see that below his armor I actually do have his full body. So I can paint stuff that's specific to metal, like scratches and grime and dirt, and I can also paint stuff that's specific to characters, like skin details, skin highlights, and all of that good stuff. So as texture artists, when it comes to geometry, we do need to be concerned with one thing, and that is UV layout. And you can see that I laid out his UVs in 14 mediums. Now I'll skip over the conversation about textile density and textile consistency. I'm hoping everybody is aware of that. But I do want to point out a couple of things that make UVing for Mari a much faster process than for any other texture package out there. The first thing is the fact that Mari allows me to have UV shells that are crossing UDIM tiles. For example, this one goes between 1004 and 1005. Now, for the purposes of the demo, I actually kept this pretty minimal, so everything else is pretty traditionally laid out. But this can make a gigantic difference in terms of time taken to UV something when it comes to large objects like a building. And I'm just going to bring up a building that I've done, frame it so we can see it, and then I'll bring back my texture data. So in here you can see that I have laid out its UVs across multiple tiles. This is a major time saver because now I don't have to go into the geometry and insert edge loops and cut the UV shells based on UDIM borders. This not only saves me a lot of time in the UVing process, it also makes for a much more efficient UV layout, because being able to pack my UV shells like this means that in this case I only have 12 UDIMs that I have to paint, and more importantly there's 12 UDIMs that I have to render, which can have a great impact over your hardware resources when it comes time to render stuff. Going back to the Iron Man asset, you can see from the outliner that this is a full production asset. Now you can bring your object into Mari the way it is, like this one, but I find that you're going to save a lot of time in Mari if you organize this object differently, and I'm about to show you how. So I'm going to open up a new file where this Iron Man asset is organized differently. The asset is organized based on its concept, so I'm just going to bring that concept right here. And I can tell just by looking at this that the asset is going to have a couple of different materials. It's going to have a gold material, it's going to have a red paint material, a darker red paint material, and then some parts that are painted blue. There's also a different color for different repulsors that he has. So based on this concept, I went ahead and split the geometry and assigned different materials to it. So in this case, this is a single piece of geo, and in here I have 20 materials. Now a lot of these materials you don't really see in this viewport because they're part of his body, like the teeth and the tongue, but the way it's split does reflect how the concept looks like. I consider this to be a crucial step in the texturing process. These 20 materials that I assign here are actually the materials that are going to get assigned later in Katana at render time. Now, as far as Mari is concerned, I can certainly use materials inside of Mari, but that was not the purpose of the demo. I wanted to help our artist understand the process of texturing, so although I have 20 separate materials, in Mari you will see that I'm going to use a single PXR surface shader. What I'm going to use these materials for is to get my selection groups for free when I import the object in, and then later on use those selection groups as selection masks. So then I'm going to split every different material into its own texture branch and have them all come together in the end into a diffuse channel that I'm going to feed into the PXR surface shader. So you can say that combining the asset and assigning these separate materials in Maya represents the backbone of this texturing workflow that I'm about to demonstrate. So now that we're happy with this asset, I am just going to select it and export it, and I'm going to export this as an FBX. The export settings are the default export settings for FBX, so I'm just going to hit export selection, and next I will go into Mari. And before I go into texturing, I want to talk to you about another way that we're helping our artists to hit the ground running in Mari, and that is the Mari template. What is the Mari template? Well, in this case, the Mari template is just a project. It's an archive that everybody will extract it before starting to work on their asset. So let's take a look at how using a template has great advantages when working in a studio pipeline. This is one of the templates that our artists are using. Although the template is structured in a similar way, depending on the show there might be slight differences between them, but they all have a few things in common. One of the most important ones is the fact that the color space is already set up. As we know, color spaces can be a major headache in a studio if they're not set up correctly, so not only they're set up on the pipeline side, they're also set up within this project. The next thing that's set up in the template are the channel names. Like every other studio out there, we do have a naming conventions for our textures. Now we don't want to rely on the artist to get that right every time, so the fact that we set it up in the template means they can't really get it wrong. So if I open up the export manager here, you can see that not only the channel names are set up, but also the way the textures are getting exported. In this case will be the name of the object, the name of the channel, and the UDIM number. We also already set up the type of file that gets exported, its bit depth, its color space, and its size. Now, of course, we encourage our artists to change the export resolution because not every channel needs to be exported as a 4K. But in terms of painting resolution, just to make sure that everything is consistent with the texel density that we set up in Mari, everything gets painted as a 4K channel. The next thing that's part of the template is an HDR. So I'll just go to display properties in here and just enable it. This HDR is the exact same one that we have in our look depth turntable. So once we're done painting all of the textures, we'll use this HDR to balance them with the PXR surface shader so that the result that we're getting is as close to the concept as possible. this rough lookdev pass that we do in Mari can also serve as a reference for the lookdev artist to understand how these textures should be used. At Atomic, we have a texturing department that's separate from the shading department, so it's very helpful for the lookdev artist to be able to see that the textures that were done in Mari can actually achieve the result that they're trying to do using Katana. The template is of course using the node graph, and apart from the channel names that are set up in here, there's a few other handy things. For example, there's a PXR surface material that's hooked up to all of the channels. This is where we're going to do a rough lookdev pass once we have the textures painted. There's also a backdrop with an ambient and curvature geo channels. So once we have the asset in, we're going to use this to bake our ambient occlusion and our curvature. And we also have a couple of matte IDs set up, and we're going to use this to generate selection masks. And now that we talked about the advantages of using a template project, let's bring in the asset from Maya and see how those materials that we set up are going to help us in the texturing process. Because our series of tutorials is mostly intended for people that have never used Mari before, even bringing your object in is as easy as following the prompt on the screen. In this case, add asset as version here. So I'll just go to my object palette and I will do exactly what the text says. I'll right click in here and go add version. I'll navigate to my folder, and in here I will choose my Iron Man asset that I just exported from Maya and hit open. And in the dialog box, I do want to create selection groups from face groups. I do want to switch this to a single frame because I have no animation on my FBX, and then I'll hit OK. And Mari is going to go ahead and import this object. So in here, I can either switch to it from here, or in this case, since I don't really need this temp text anymore, I will just hit the trash can. And that text gets removed, and I have my Iron Man asset in Mari. So the first thing that I need to do to make sure everything gets exported properly when it comes time to export the textures, I will rename this to the name of the asset. I said that by assigning those materials in Maya, I'm going to get selection groups for free in Mari, and that's exactly what happened. If I take a look in my selection groups, you can see that all my materials that I set up in Maya are now in here. As I mentioned, the goal is to get these selection groups converted into selection masks. Before showing you the different ways of converting these selection groups to selection masks, I do want to caveat something. Like all the other studios that I work for, our Mari installation does have the extension pack. This is a plugin for Mari that greatly enhances its functionality. Now, for the most part, you can achieve the exact same result using Mari native nodes, but using the extension pack can really speed up the process of texture painting. So let's start creating those selection masks. And there's a couple of different ways of doing that. Using the Mari native way, you can either create a black paint node and then selecting parts of your asset using the selection groups and filling that selection with white. You can also use a selection mask node, and you can cache it based on the selection group that you have highlighted in your selection groups palette. Because we have the extension pack, we're actually using a different way of baking these selection masks. So I'll just get rid of these two, and I'll go back to my selection groups palette in here. I'll dock it, and I will click on this button here at the bottom. And that will bring up this material ID from selection groups window. Now the template is already set up the correct way, so all our artists have to do is just select everything, bring this on to the other side, and it's set up to be baked as a geo channel, it's set up to be baked as 1K and as a mask. So all they have to do is then hit OK. And this process can take up to a couple of minutes depending on how many UDIMs you have, but as you can see, it's going through all of the selection groups and it's going to create a mask for them. So the process has finished, and let's take a look at what it did. The template comes set up with a couple of material ID nodes in here, and if an artist needs more than what's in here based on the number of selection groups that they have, they can certainly create more. But let's just select one that's already created and see what we have. So in this drop-down menu, you can see that the tool has created a selection mask for each and every one of the selection groups. So in here, I'll just go and choose this metal red, and I'm just going to view the node. And as before with the paint node and with the selection mask node, it created a black and white mask for the parts that were selected. You can see that all of these nodes are connected to this node that just says RT. RT stands for radio transmitter, And this is part of a pair of nodes. These are extension pack nodes, but Mari has its own native nodes. They're called broadcaster and receiver. They do the exact same thing. In this case, the radio transmitter is the counterpart of the broadcaster. So the counterpart of the receiver for the extension pack is a radio node. So in here, I will just type in radio node, and this thing is going to come in. So what is their purpose? Their purpose is basically to wirelessly transmit information across your node graph. So instead of having to drag connecting lines from one node to another, in the radio node or in the receiver, you just specify what radio transmitter is connected to, and that information gets passed on into your texture graph. But for these nodes to work, you actually have to know what to connect them to. So if I go in here and hit Shift R, which is the shortcut to display all of the radio nodes, you can see that some of them do have a name, but in this case, everything here is called RT. So I would have no idea what to connect it to unless I rename it. So I'm just going to go ahead and rename this radio transmitter here. And now if I select this and hit Shift R, you will see that I have a metal red transmitter in here. So now I'll go ahead and hook up all of these material IDs to their respective selection groups and then rename all these radio transmitter nodes. While this sounds like a tedious process, and sometimes it actually is, it is a crucial part of organizing your node graph. Without a name, you won't know what to connect it to, and it's just very important to keep your stuff organized in case another artist wants to pick up your work, and even for yourself to orient yourself in the node graph fast and figure out what's connected to what. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes doing all of this, and then I will show you the end result. Okay, so now we have all of our selection masks connected. As you can see, if I'm switching to these guys from one to another, different things become white in the viewport. So how is all this work going to help us in our texturing? But before I get into it, I want to explain this node. This is a multi-mixer node, and it is an extension pack node that allows you to bring up to 8 separate nodes and blend them together, either on their own or using masks to separate them. This works exactly the same as the Mari merge node. The only difference is the number of nodes that you can blend at one time. So I can achieve the same result by using 7 merge nodes. So let's see what happened. I'm just gonna go in here and view this transmitter node. And what I've done in here is basically set up a simplified version of the texturing tree where I have a color representing that selection group. I have the selection mask that's separating this color from the next one. So the way your texture graph is going to come together is by replacing this color node with multiple texture nodes and multiple adjustment nodes. So next I'm going to show you how this texture branch is going to come together for this metal red material. But before we go into the details of doing that, we have to do one more step to make everything ready for the texturing process, and that is to bake our curvature and our ambient occlusion. So I'm just gonna go ahead and display the full object here, and this is already set up in the template. So I already have my 2 geo channels, ambient occlusion and curvature in here, and they're hooked up to 2 different channels as well. So let's just bake these 2 channels here. So I'm going to open up the bakery, and as I said, these are already set up in the template, so I will just hit bake and let's see what happened. So I have my ambient occlusion and my curvature ready to go. Now this is where the fun begins. So like I mentioned before, we have to replace this color node with an entire texturing branch that will represent all of the textures for this metal red selection group. Before we get into it, as a texture artist, you'll need to make sure you have a couple of things that you can actually do your work with. So in this case, I'm just going to go to my image manager here, and you can see that I have brought in a couple of images. In this case, these are just designs that I'm going to need for his arc reactor, for example, and a couple of PNG images that represent body detail. I've organized my image manager by tab, so I have an HDR tab just with the HDR image, and using the texture sets import, which is a very useful feature in Mari where you can import things from Megascans or Quixel. I have brought in a couple of metallic textures from Quixel. So in this case, I brought in a set of aluminum, steel, iron, brushed steel, and you can't properly texture if you don't have masks. So in here, I have a whole bunch of black and white masks. Some of them are just JPEGs, some of them are just transparent PNGs with certain details. And I'm going to use these masks in two ways. One is to use them as styled textures. And second, especially for these PNGs, is to hand paint some details exactly what I want them to give the character a unique look. So going back to the node graph, before I start creating any nodes, since this demo is meant for the artist to understand the texturing process, we have to take a step back and actually think what we need to do. From a creative standpoint, I want to give this guy more of a battle damage look. While this is not a look that would get approved for a preschool type of show, it's certainly going to make for a more interesting texturing process. So what does a battle damage look entail? Well, in the case of Iron Man, I will need to have a base metal since his suit is made out of that material. And on top of that, I will need to have a layer of paint. To achieve the battle damage look, that layer of paint needs to have all of the stuff that convey to the viewer that this suit has seen some action, like scratches and discoloration and grime and burn marks and all of the things that make an asset look good. So this is from a creative standpoint. Now, from a technical standpoint, how do I achieve that? Well, obviously, for the base metal, I will need a metal texture, and for the paint layer, I basically just need a color. But all of the nice details are actually going to come from a mask. It's the mask that will get applied to the paint to reveal the metal underneath. And Mari has a whole bunch of smart masks in here, and I could use these as a starting point, but because these demos are intended for the texture artist to understand the texturing process itself, I would rather build such a mask from scratch. I think the process of building a mask from scratch helps artists to develop their skills and gives them a deeper understanding of what it actually means to paint a texture and how to build a texture graph that gives an object a unique look. Now let's start building the mask. So I'm going to get a merge node, and I'm going to keep this metal red. So the idea is that I'm going to see mostly the paint and not so much of the metal. So I'm just going to connect this into the base here, and then I'll get another color node. And I'll make this color like some dark gray, just to represent some metal underneath. And I'll just put this in here. So now let's just view this merge node. And because there's no mask involved, of course, I'm just getting the dark gray. So let's build a mask. I'm going to start by getting a multi-mixer node. And I'm going to hook this up in here. And nothing will change in the viewport because by default, the multi-mixer node has the first layer enabled and it's set to white. The color is set to white. But we don't want to use the color. We want to use a couple of textures, and we want to use some of these masks that we have. So we're going to build this mask in layers. First, most of the metal is going to be seen towards the edges of these metal pieces. So we'll need to use our big curvature map for that. But of course, the curvature map on its own is just going to look too clean. So we'll have to break that up. Once we have a nicely broken curvature map, we can add more details on top of that to give the asset a more unique look. So let's just start with some masks that are going to represent the basic breakup of the whole thing. So I'll just get a triplanar projection node here. And this node allows you to plug in up to 3 different textures, one to project from the front, another one from the top, and another one from the side. So I'll just take this one and plug it into the map VG in here. So let's open up the image manager and select some masks from here. I'm looking for masks that are sort of balanced in terms of their black and white contribution. So I'll just take, for example, this one to project it from the front. And then I will maybe use the same one to project from the top, and then let's just use a different one just for the sake of it. I'm just going to use this one or this one to project from the side. Now, as you can see, something has changed. I just have a darker red, but it's not what I would expect from plugging in these textures. And the reason that it looks like this is because the world scale by default in the triplanar projection is actually really small. So I'm just going to type in 100. And as soon as I do that, you can see that I have a lot of paint and not so much metal here. So that's exactly what I'm looking for. But remember, we want to put the curvature map on top of this. So I'm mostly interested in this breakup to be a fine breakup because it's going to get mostly cut out by the curvature map. So in the triplanar projection node, I want to get rid of some of this blending, and I'll do that just by playing with the fall off start and the fall off end in here. So let's just try and get something that's a bit nicer, not so stretchy, something like that. And since scratch paint is basically a on or off situation, you either have paint or you don't, there's not much of a gradient in there. I would like this mask to be as black and white as possible. As you can see in the original textures, this is a bit just dark gray. So I'm going to get a grade node, and I'll just raise the black point to get a crisper image in here. Now, I was thinking about the curvature map that's going to come on the edges of these objects. I think I want more of this dark gray to show through. So in here, I'll just repeat some of these textures. So maybe I'll repeat the front one twice and do the same thing for the top one. And I will do the same thing for the side one. And I think I want more of that dark gray to come through. So I'll just go back into my grade node and I'll just play with these values just so that I get more of that dark gray coming through. Okay, I'm going to say I'm fairly happy with this. Let's just collapse these nodes, and you can do that by hitting Alt-1. So now I'll get another texture. I want additional breakup on top of this, and I want to get more of a scratch-like texture. So I'll just get a tiled node. And in here, I'll add another mask. Maybe let's see how this one looks. It's got a few nice details in here, so I think I'll just use this one. Just bring this one in. And then I'll connect this into the map 2. So let's enable layer 2 in the multi-mixer. And I think this looks too large. So in here, I'll just tile this a couple of times. Let's try 8 and see what we get. I guess this is a pretty fine detail. And I'll do the same thing. I'll just use a grade node just to grade this down a bit, get more of a black and white image, not so much a gradient. So something along these lines. And of course I have to change the blending mode, so I will put this on multiply. So now, as you can see, I have an additional layer of breakup in this pane. So if I play with the black levels here, I'll get an even more breakup. So let's see what this does against our curvature map. So I'll get a radio node in here, and we'll connect this to our curvature map. And then we will put this in map 3, and let's just enable it. And of course, by default, most of it is black, but we can already see some of the dark gray showing where the edges of the object is. So I'll get another grade node. And in here, I'll just drop the white point so I get a more contrasty image. Say something like this is pretty good. But as you can see, this feels a bit artificial. Since it's based on the shape of the object, it's only going to be as good as the modeling itself. So in here, I'm going to insert the bake node, just because I want to add a filter to it and blur this curvature map a bit. I want to make this bake point quite small because I want to get a nice blur out of it. So I'll just leave that at the default, and in here I will just bake it. And once it's baked, I'll go to the filters and I will add a blur filter from here. And I have preview enabled so you can see what's going on in here. Maybe 4 is a bit much, so I'll just try something like 2. And I'm going to say I'm happy with this, so I'll just hit apply. So now let's put this curvature map on multiply here so we can see what the breakup does. And this is what we get. We get a curvature map that's really broken up and it's got a lot of details, but I still don't like these fairly perfect edges. So I think we need to take this down a bit. So just go back to the gray node and maybe bring this down a notch. Something like that. And if I don't like the look of this, I'll go back into the triplanar projection and I'll just change the world scale. So let's try something like 120. And you can see that I'm getting a completely different look. I'll probably go something smaller like 60. And this gives me a finer breakup, but I think that's too small, so I'll just go 80. And I think I'm quite happy with the result so far. Okay, so now we have a breakup that's along the edges, which is quite nice, but of course it's not nearly enough for what we want to achieve. So let's add more overall scratches. So I'm just going to take this tile node and duplicate it. And in here, I'll add one of these PNG masks, and I want it to be something white. So maybe some of these fine scratches. I'll just go in here and just replace this. And let's connect this node into our multi-mixer node in map 4, and let's just enable it. And as we did with the other ones, we will need to grade this down. I'm going to choose a grade node from here, and let's zoom in a bit, and we'll make this white more pronounced. And as I'm doing this, you can see how these fine scratches are coming to life. So by dropping this, I'm going to get more contrasty ones, and if I raise the lift attribute, I'm going to get finer ones just to be barely seen. But you know, these are kind of going everywhere and I'm not really liking this. So I'm going to use a mask to break up this styling. I'm just going to duplicate this one. And then in here, I will choose a texture that has a lot of black into it. So I think I'll just go with this one. So let's just connect this into the alpha 4 in here, and instantly you can see that some of these scratches have disappeared. And I will get another grade node and again play with the black values to make things fade away somewhere. I can also play with the tiling of this thing. So right now it's set at 8, so let's just set this at 4 so we have larger areas of breakup. So now I get this overall scratches. They're quite fine and I think they're looking quite good, but it still doesn't feel like a unique type of asset. To make it look unique, I would like to add some hand-painted details to this to really make it come to life. First, a bit of housekeeping. So I'll just go in here and I want to name everything so I know what these layers represent. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and once this is done, we'll use some of these nice PNG masks to add some unique painted details to this asset. Okay, so I went ahead and did a bit of cleanup in here. As you can see, I've named everything in the multi-mixer and also everything in the node graph. So now for the painted details, I'm going to go in here and get a paint node. And in this paint node, my size will be 4K, which matches the size of the channel. It's going to be a 16-bit paint node, same as the channel. And since this is a mask, I'm going to enable both raw and scalar data here. And I'm going to hit OK. And I'll connect this into map 5, and let's just name this, and I'll copy this name onto the paint node itself. So as you can see, even though it is enabled, nothing happened because this is now an empty paint node. So I will just zoom in here onto the top of his helmet, which is what I want to paint, and I'm going to make sure that only this is selected. And I have two options for painting this. I can either use a brush and paint my details with a brush, or I can use the paint through tool and use a texture to project existing details from that texture. Since this entire thing is just a mask, I don't have to worry about colors. I only have black and white to deal with, and in this case I have to paint with white. But first, let's just get a brush that has a more broken paint type of look. So I'm just going to go with this one, and in the tool properties I want to customize this brush so that it applies at full value. So let's zoom in on the area that we want to paint, and let's just start painting. And by doing this, I'm revealing the metal underneath. And the advantage of using this as a mask is that I can always swap the colors just by hitting X, and now I am taking away some of this paint information. So I'm going to spend some time doing this around the edges of the mask. And then in the next step, I'll use the paint through tool to add more unique details to the top of his mask. Okay, so I did a pass with just the paint tool, adding more areas of chipped paint and also removing stuff from these procedural ones that I didn't like that was there. So now I'm just going to switch to the paint through tool. In my image manager, I'm going to get one of these, let's try this image, which has a lot of scratches. And just because I want to keep things organized and I want to have control over everything, I'm going to get a new paint layer, and you will have the exact same settings as the one above. And I'll just connect this to map 6. So let's just enable this. And now I'm going to use that image to project some of these unique details just on top of his helmet here. I'm going to have to change the brush to something that's nicer. I'm just probably going to use the same brush. So this type of details will make the asset really pop. And I'm going to try and follow the shape of his helmet with the scratches. And I'll spend some time doing this until I get something that I'm happy with. So I took a pass at doing this manual projection of scratches and just painting things in and out, not only on the top of the helmet, but also on the entire asset. So thinking about where this suit would get damaged if it gets into a battle scenario, I removed more paint on the corners, and I actually put back some of the paint where the curvature map and all of these procedurals were taking it out. And just overall added a lot of details, not only to this what's going to become this metal red group, but the other types of metal as well. I spent some time on these knee pads just to add a lot of this unique painted detail. Same with his boots, and just overall making sure that this looks more natural and has a more unique feel to it rather than a procedurally generated mask with, just breakup in it. And the reason that I've done this for every piece of his armor, not just for the metal red group, is because I can now use this mask in all of these other groups that are making up his entire armor. So now that this is finished, I can actually do two things. If I remove the painted detail from it, I can actually make this into a gizmo and turn this into a smart mask. With the painted detail added to it, I can take this and use it for every other single selection group that I have. But before I go ahead and do that, let's just finish up this first metal red group. So here I have a merge node with just two colors coming in as a simplification for this entire metal red group. So what I'm going to do next is actually bring in a metal texture and then really start building this metal red selection group. So let's just go in here and I will get a tiled node, and in this tile node I will bring in one of these metal base textures, and in this case I'll just go to this iron one and just drag this in. So let's take a look at how it looks. So it's fairly bland, there's not much detail in it. So the first thing I'll do is just get a grade node, and I'll just increase the contrast because I kind of want to see a bit more detail in this thing, somewhere along these lines. And let's just style this some more. I'll probably put this to something like 4 and 4. And let's replace this merge node with another multi-mixer node. And I'm gonna plug this in here into my metal base. And then I have my original red color. And I'm gonna plug this now into my map 2. And then this entire mask is going to be in alpha 2. Now something strange is going to happen when I'm viewing this. So what happens is, because my mask is mostly black, I am seeing now more of the metal than the paint. So what I'll need to do in here is just get an invert node, just plug this in here. Now this looks more like what I'm expecting, and just because I have so many gray nodes and these values might have gone above 1, it's just a good habit to get a clamp node and clamp everything between 0 and 1. Just avoids issues later on. So now I have a base metal underneath and a paint layer on top. Now this paint layer can use a lot more detail, and the first type of detail that I'm going to add to it is a bit of discoloration. Now things are going to get pretty streamlined from here because these steps are actually quite easy. Once I have this painted mask, the rest of it is kind of going to fall into place. So in here, I'm actually not going to use a colored node. I'm just going to use it to sample the color. So I'll just click on this one and then just sample this color. So then I can actually get rid of the color node itself because this one has color embedded in it. So I'll just get rid of that. And I'm going to spend some time and name all this. So now let's add some discoloration to it. So I'm just going to enable layer 3. And in here, I'm going to sample this same red color. And for now, I'll leave it like this. And the idea is to have some breakup in this second shade of red. So I'll just get another tile node and I'm going to just duplicate this base metal one. And we'll call this breakup. I'm just going to plug this into the alpha 3 of the node. And let's just get a black and white texture. And I want this discoloration to be pretty subtle. So I'm going to get something like this. And because I have the exact same shade of red, nothing's going to change. As soon as I'm going to start changing the value of this, I'm just going to make it a bit lighter. You can see that this is going to start showing up. And then this is a bit much, so I'm going to get a grade node and grade this down to something that's a lot more subtle than this. And after a couple of more tweaks, I ended up with something like this, which I think is going to work. And looking at it, I think the metal is a bit too bright, so I'm just going to take this down a bit, something like that. And now I want to add even more breakup to the whole thing. So I'm going to use an oil procedural. This is one of my favorite nodes to break up stuff. And I'm just going to play with its organicness and maybe its size. Just kind of get a larger breakup. I want this to be subtle, so I'm going to tone down the roughness. And I could keep it black and white, but I'm actually going to change this to just another shade of darker red. And then in here, I will change this to overlay and make it really, really subtle. Something like this. Now, I feel like this character is a bit too uniform top to bottom. So what I want to do is use a gradient from the bottom to the top to just ground him better. Now there's a couple of ways of doing this. You can actually use the gradient tool in here to just project through the whole thing. But in my case, I will use an extension pack node, and that is called a directional gradient. And I'm just going to hook this up in map 5. And it comes pretty okay just out of the box. So I'm actually not going to spend too much time on this. I will just put this on multiply and then take this all the way to a very, very subtle value. Something around 0.1 will do. So now I'll spend a bit more time adding more unique details around his boots because I think it's in a pretty good place. As you might have noticed from this exercise, I have never switched Mari from the flat shaded mode. The reason that I'm doing that is because I'm a firm believer that a texture starts to look good when you can tell the shape of the object if you look at it in flat shaded mode. So I would like artists to rely as little as possible on shaded view or even worse, material view to judge how their textures look like. Looking at them in flat shaded mode is exactly how the texture is going to look when it gets exported. So I'm fairly confident that if the texture looks good in flat shaded mode, it's going to do a good job when it comes to look depth. I've spent more time adding more detail to this. So what I've done in here is I duplicated this oil breakup and I called it bottom dirt. And in here I have painted a mask just around the bottom of his feet here. And I'm using this mask to control where this procedural goes. So if I view my multi-mixer node, you can see that the dirt is just around the bottom of his feet there. I also wanted to add a bit of dust to his boots. So in here I just have a color that's driven by this very speckly texture with a gradient on top of it. So I have this mask that controls the height of the dust. And you can see that the whole thing is really, really subtle. It's set at an intensity of just 0.1. I moved the directional gradient lower down in the layer stack, and then on top of everything I have added my ambient occlusion. But because this is a character and it's going to move, I don't want this to be distracting, so I made it again very subtle. So I have quite a few different nodes now going into this metal red. So what I'm doing just to make my life and Mari's life easier when dealing with this is use a bake node and bake just certain UDIMs, in this case just the UDIMs where the metal red is, to make it easier for me to interact with Mari as I'm painting more of these selection groups. So now that we have this, let's just switch back to our diffuse channel, and we can see that we have this fully painted. And what I'm going to do next is basically use this exact same setup for all of these selection groups that are representing metal. And since I don't have time to go over everything live, I will show you the end result of the diffuse channel. Okay, so the diffuse channel is now painted, and you can see here that I have my metal red group, and then basically everything that's part of the armor is more or less a duplicate of this entire thing. Now they have specific things, and for some groups I actually took out stuff and added others. So this would be my metal dark red, and then same recipe for the blue. A bit of a different one for gold, since this one is not actually painted metal, it's just gold. But I took the same approach where I added very fine scratches to the whole thing. And then I have the repulses, which are much simpler because it's basically just a color. And then I also, if I hide the face mask selection group, you can see that I've also painted his face. And the paint for the face is really just traditional painting. I love using this super soft brush. Is one of the best brushes when it comes to painting color for the face. You can see that I've also organized it differently. This is the entire skin, and you can see all of these hand painted layers, and then everything just goes back into my diffuse channel. So the final look of my diffuse channel is something along the lines of this. You can see that as far as texture graphs go, this is actually quite easy, but I used a bake point in every single group just to make my life and Mari's life, as I mentioned, easier in terms of interacting with it. So for the next step, I am going to duplicate this entire diffuse channel and create the reflection channel, the roughness channel, the bump channel, and everything else that I need for my final look depth. So what that entails is really just selecting everything, hitting Ctrl C, and then I'm just going to go into an empty area of the graph and then hit Ctrl V, and I'm going to take all of these nodes and move them into this reflection backdrop and modify them so that they have the correct values that I need for my reflection map. So let's take a look at what I've done in here. So this is the metal red group. I'm just going to view it. And as you can see, these nodes are basically the same, but I desaturated everything since I don't want any color in this metal red material. And because this is a reflection channel, basically where I have a higher value, I will have a higher reflection, and where I have a lower gray value, I will have less reflection. Since this is just two types of materials, paint and metal, you can see that for the most part, this is pretty much using the same values with the exception of the dirt and the dust, which is darker because that area should reflect less than the rest of it. And based on this recipe, I have actually done all of them just the same. So I'm just going to view the entire reflection channel. And this is how it ended up looking in the end. As you can see, my values are different, and in the gold I actually have color, since the specular highlight for gold is colored, not black and white. And all of these values are set up based on the amount of reflectivity that I'm expecting the shader to give off. So for the areas that are black, I'm expecting zero reflectivity because this is actually an emissive material. And for areas that are almost white, I'm expecting quite a bit of reflection. To give you an idea of the time spent to do all this, I probably spent about 4 hours painting the diffuse channel. That includes hand painting and using all of these procedurals. But I probably spent 15 minutes tweaking it so that it becomes the reflection channel. And then I took the exact same approach for the roughness channel. Here, basically, the darker the value, the shinier the object will be. And where I have dirt on the bottom of his feet, you can see that I have fully white, which means I'm not expecting any shininess there. This is going to be fully matte, same for these lines in his torso. But for the pieces that I want to be shiny, I have a much lower gray value. For the bump up, I took a slightly different approach, since this one deals with values differently, 0.5 representing no bump, and what's above is going to represent raised surfaces, what's below is going to represent recessed surfaces. So although the texture graph looks the same, you can see that I disabled a couple of things. In this case, the color breakup is off because breakup in the color doesn't contribute to anything in terms of bump value. And also things like gradient and ambient occlusion are disabled for this map. But since the channel is just a duplicate, every other detail is exactly the same as in the diffuse channel. I also have a very simple refraction channel. As you would expect, everything else but the glass pieces are black and the glass itself is white. I have an emission channel for the arc reactor and the repulsor, so I'm just going to turn off the glass in here. And this is going to glow into the glow attribute of the PXR surface shader. And last but not least, I have an SSS channel. So if I turn off the face mask, and this channel is basically a duplicate of the skin selection group, and it's just a more saturated version of the diffuse channel when it comes to skin. Because in our look dev process in Katana, we're using the Llama Renderman shaders, which is basically a material layering system. I wanted control over the paint layer versus the metal layer. So in this case, I have a black and white map with white representing the paint and dark gray or black representing the metal. And I'm going to use this in Katana to separate the two. Think of this as sort of an inverted metalness mask. Now, Renderman materials don't have metalness, and probably for good reason, since metalness is not actually a physical property of the material. But because of the layering system, I can add a Llama material representing the metal and another Llama material representing the paint, and I'm going to use this mask to separate the two. And the last channel that I have is a skin face mask, which is basically just an RGB mask so I can control different areas of his face in LookDev. So now that all of the channels are painted, let's see how it all comes together in this PXR surface shader that we have in Mari. So now I'm looking at the PXR surface, and just to see some of the detail, we're going to zoom into his face. And if we're looking how everything is hooked up, because I'm using a single shader setup, and this is really for the sake of simplicity, since this tutorial series are intended for people that are new to Mari, I had to do some adjustments to make everything else work. So in this case, for example, if I look in the diffuse gain, I had to separate the painted areas from the gold just because the diffuse contribution will be different. And in here, I have made slight adjustments to all of these textures to bring the asset closer to what I had in mind in terms of look dev. Also, because this is a PXR surface, and like I said, in Katana, we're working with Llama shaders, I connected these channels to attributes that, in the case of PXR surface, it will only do an approximation of what the Llama shaders will do in Katana. So after connecting everything into the shader and looking at the end result, even with these minor adjustments that I had to make based on the fact that I'm using a single shader setup versus 20 shaders that I'm going to have assigned to this species in Katana, I'm fairly confident that the textures that I painted will work as intended when it comes to do the look dev in Katana. So I'm just going to maximize the viewport so we can see the asset closer. And next I'm going to bring up the turntable look depth that I've done in Katana using these exact channels that I painted so we can compare the final result. So this is how the asset ended up looking after doing the look depth process. And if I'm going to move these to try and see them side by side, you can see that what I'm getting in Mari and what I'm getting in Katana are really not that far off from each other, especially considering that I'm using a single shader in Mari and 20 separate shaders in Katana.
27 shaders. Wow. Okay. That shocked me right at the end there. Thank you so much for walking us through that. Wow. I know there was a bunch of questions in the chat, and I know you were eager to address them. But first, I want to ask you a question on my own, which is just for everyone here who is currently studying texturing or who is thinking about moving studios sometime soon. What's one piece of advice you would give them if they are looking to potentially work at Atomic Cartoons?
Don't rely so much on automation, because you can't figure out everything if you just rely on automation. You have to figure some stuff yourself. So that would be my biggest piece of advice.
You know what? We hear that from everyone. Less presets, more painting. Let's learn to do it. And then we can make our own templates like you have done, and we can reuse what we've done. Yes, awesome. Awesome advice. So, is there any particular question you would like to start off with at all?
Yeah, so the 16-bit versus 8-bit. It's a very complicated question. It sounds simple, but it's actually quite complex. It's got a lot of layers to it. It depends what you're trying to achieve. It depends on the software you're working with. It depends on all of the other softwares that you're going to work with after you're done working in Mari. If you're going to put this in Unreal, for example, don't bother with 16-bit images, just do 8-bit, it's fine. If you're going to use Katana and then Nuke, you better go 16-bit. Now, in your viewport, unless you have a fancy monitor like a 10-bit or 12-bit monitor, you're going to see zero difference. What you're going to see on your screen is going to be exactly the same. What is going to make a difference is when you go to Nuke, because then you have way more range to tweak the final output of the look dev. So even in look dev, you can actually tweak a 16-bit image way more because you have 4096 levels. So it's a completely different thing from 256. But depends what you're using it for. We have everything set up as 16-bit because we are using Katana and then Nuke to comp stuff. From VFX, absolutely, you need to be in 16-bit. There's no way. All the plates that are coming in, depending on the camera that they shot it with, are 10, 14 bits. So you have to have 16 bits. It's just not. It's a requirement.
Yeah.
Masks, honestly, I don't know. On masks, painting masks, I'm kind of torn because it's a mask and that kind of gets baked into the texture. So I don't really see the reason to use 16-bit masks. I just do it because I'm used to it. Is it necessary? Probably not. But, it's black and white. There's not much value in that. It's either black or white. So.
Yeah, I don't know the real answer to that, but I definitely always make my masks 8-bit. So.
No, because it's just black and white.
Oh, that's right.
So it's not like that's just just what I'm used to, I guess. But you can make your masks 8-bit. It's fine. That doesn't get exported. It's just baked in.
Yeah.
But yeah, the clamp node, absolutely. The clamp node you must use if you're using 16-bit. If your values go over 1, you'll get some really weird blending when you're trying to blend things together. So yeah, clamp for sure.
Yes, I think the clamp node is a smart move for anyone who isn't explicitly working with HDRI images, like high dynamic range outside of 0 and 1, just for sanity checking that no mathematics have gone wrong anywhere down the node graph to make sure you're not ending up with a black that isn't actually black or a white that isn't white. This is actually the bane of my life, is color not being the right color. But yes, definitely that. So there was also
Let
a
me,
question about the bakery or baking in general.
yeah,
Do you only need to bake curvature and AO, or should you bake all of your
it depends.
maps?
It depends what I'm doing. In this case, yes, and honestly, for a lot of assets, I just do that. There's assets where I bake a thickness map. There's, again, depends what you want to do with it. There's no straightforward answer. You should do it or you shouldn't do it. It's really what are you trying to achieve with it. Um, I don't see any reason to use Substance Painter to bake anything. Just Mari's faster at it. Really, why would I leave the program? It's like it can do it just fine. So yeah.
Use Mari.
It has improved a lot since the Moto Bake. The bakery is like a giant leap forward. It's not even comparable. So yeah,
Yeah,
very happy to use it. Yeah.
I love to hear that. No, it's absolutely the case that we see a lot more studios, a lot more individual artists adopting the bakery. It is incredibly fast. And if you
It is.
haven't tried it, you should, because it'll only waste a few seconds of your life to try it out. It is really that quick.
And
Um,
it also helps to change the settings a bit. Even if every asset will be different. So the fact that you baked it with some settings on one doesn't mean that the same settings are going to work for another one. You do have to go in and customize some stuff. It's just can't really
yes.
give you a perfect result out of the box.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I think that's good advice for any application and
yeah,
any kind of asset. I think you would probably have to do the same in Painter, or if you're using any other tool for baking as well. It's always going to be think about what you need for the actual asset that you're working on. Don't bloat your project if you don't have to. It is very difficult, I know, to find the exact perfect preferences for Mari because um, we are so affected by your individual setup, which is why we haven't always give like specific, hey, set this to this number and it'll be amazing, because it really is dependent on your GPU, how much VRAM you have available, etc., etc.
yeah.
But there is a really handy tool for a lot of Mari preferences that Jens from Extension Pack created. I know we've done a lot of bigging up Extension Pack today, but let me do it again. He does have a project performance optimization tool online on his website. Definitely recommend checking it out if you want to get a good first base to go off before then tweaking things yourself. Definitely great.
There's a couple of other questions about the
Mm-hmm.
studio template. It is not available. It's kind of proprietary to Atomic, but you can make it yourself. That's how you learn. That's the best way, to learn and explore the texturing process is really not that hard. That's why I recommend making masks from scratch. Like the masks are good. Don't get me wrong. The masks that are in Mari, perfectly fine. But it's much better for you to understand the process. Just build it yourself. It's
Yeah, exactly. The cool thing with the smart masks in Mari is that they were designed to be adopted. Like, definitely dive into them, have a look at what they're doing. They're all annotated, and if you like what that part of it is doing, take it, make your own one. Absolutely, go wild, but build out your own library from them for your specific needs. Absolutely.
exactly. Yeah, it's in a studio environment. We rely a lot on gizmos, or basically what you would call smartness. I
Yes.
call them gizmos just from Nuke because it's I think, but it's the same thing. Like you build, some of the stuff that I built, I just passed it as just nodes to the team, and they go wild with it. They can use it as is, or they can customize it the way they want, so it's fine. There's a
Absolutely.
question about how long does a texture artist have to work on a hero asset? Depends on the hero asset. Honestly, it can be. What do you mean by hero asset? If we mean, let's say this guy that you saw the demo, I don't know how much time they gave them, but I would assume just a regular texture artist would probably spend with revisions and everything, at least 5 days going back and forth on it with the look dev artist. Because it's not just texturing, like it needs to look good in look depth. And it's one thing to see a screenshot of Mari with the PXR surface on it, and it's another thing to see a full turntable with 20 something shaders on it.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of back and forth. The process itself, honestly, if you're an experienced texture artist, like I said, it took me half a day to do this whole thing. It's really not bad. Um, but is a hero asset ever finished? If it gets client approved, it is.
It's
No,
a
not
lot
really.
easier to approve it yourself than it is in a studio environment.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, it's finished. If the client approves it, then yeah, we call that finished. So
Yes,
you know, there are
definitely.
different constraints when working in production versus doing your own thing for sure.
Are there any features or techniques that you're yet to see in Mari that you feel like would really
I
advance your workflows?
I've already said something about this to you guys. I would really love to see transparency being able to be displayed in the viewport. That is my biggest thing. For this case, I actually brought in the glass just for to show people that it's there. I wouldn't actually bring the glass in because I can't use it. There's nothing. I can't do anything with it. Yeah, that would be my biggest thing. This multi-pane tool, actually, just a side note, because I know 7.5 is out and I actually have it on my machine just playing with it. What I've done in here, if you have a good texture set, you can do it just in one thing. You don't need all of the stuff. You just use the multi-paint node and just multi-channel paint node, and it just does it. It's awesome. And there was another question. I lost it because I thought that was an interesting question. Oh no, let's see.
Was it the
Oh,
question
why
about
not?
the material system?
Yeah, why not use the material
Mm.
system? Because you're not learning how to texture. That's the short answer of that. I don't think the material system will teach you the texturing process. Also, I've worked at a couple of different studios, all of them using Mavi. I have yet to see, and maybe it's just the studios that I work for, I have yet to see a setup where while you get in Mari or Substance Painter for that matter, doesn't matter. It's one to one what comes out of Looker. I would have to say in terms of shaders, because I've used everything under the sun, Arnold, V-Ray, Renderman, Redshift, everything that probably exists out there. Mari's materials, because they're actually from those vendors, are a much closer approximation to the actual shader that you get in Katana or in Maya or Clarice, or Clarice doesn't even exist anymore, wherever, um, than what you get from Substance Paint. It's just accuracy. It's just not there. I'm sorry. Like I've used both of them extensively. Mari's closer. That's all I can say. Is just it's closer. You still need to tweak it. There's no such thing as this is how it looks in Look Dev in Mari. This is exactly how it's going to look in Look Dev in Katana. That's not going to happen unless I didn't see it in any studio. If there's a studio out there that made that happen, that'd be impressive. But I haven't seen it. So
For any Adobe or Substance team in the audience, I did not pay him to say this. And I love you guys. I love your tools still. But it's really
I
nice to
mentioned
hear
both.
that that Mari is winning the battle there.
It,
But yeah, we
I
definitely
mentioned
have
both.
a really good relationship with shader vendors.
Okay.
You're right.
Yeah.
We don't make those shaders. They come directly from the render vendors themselves, so they are as close to one as they can be.
Yeah, I'm
Which is
actually
very
surprised that Renderman didn't actually put the Llama shaders into Mari. They just have the PXR, which is they kind of moved on from the PXR surface a few good years ago. Um,
You know what? I will have a chat with the RenderMan team and see what we can
it's,
do.
it's helpful because the Llama shaders work on a completely different. It's a completely different workflow. You literally just layer shaders on top of each other. Much more customizable, I would say, than the PXR surface. So yeah, would be nice for them to actually implement the Llama shaders in Mari. It would be much better than the PXR surface for sure.
I'd love that. I will reach out. I am taking note of any and all feature requests that have been mentioned in the chat. But I will say if anyone does have anything specifically that they really want to make sure is requested and is logged, because my memory is also a sieve, please do contact support@foundry.com. Send over your requests. Every request will get triaged by myself and the Mari team. We really do take a look at everything and really consider where we can fit them into the roadmap. There is a question for me there of any features from Painter or Designer that you're eyeing up. Watch this space, but definitely take a look at Mari 7.5. Like Rob said, it is getting close to release now. It's in open beta, so you can see everything that's coming up at it. And we are very excited about multi-paint and all of the additional stuff that is in there and really how they change the way that we feel that artists, both individual and at studio level, are going to be texturing with Mari. So yes, watch the space. I'm always aware of what our lovely friends and foes are doing, so don't worry. And I genuinely do love the Substance team. We are on great
Yeah,
terms.
no, it's a very, it's a
We're not
very
enemies.
like I have nothing. There's nothing bad to say about it. It's just I just think Mari
Incredible
does.
tool.
Yeah, Mari just teaches you more about texturing than Substance does. That's my only thing, I'd say.
That is true. Well, yeah, there's definitely something that we hear a lot from a lot of VFX studio artists, especially those who are looking at reels for juniors and looking at graduate showcases, that sort of thing. It's really what you were saying with the why you don't use the material system personally. There obviously are studios and individuals who do use the material system, but Mari's core strength is that it really forces you to learn how your maps contribute to the shader. So you are going through that process of reviewing, okay, if this is gray, what does that mean when it gets to the final map for the roughness, or what does this mean when it goes into PXR surface or versus the same map in Autodesk standard surface, for instance. Mari really forces that into you, and you're right, working it in a per channel context can really help that. Is there any last question you would like to look at? Because I realize that we are over time, but I wanted to make sure we had time to chat a little bit.
No, I don't think so. I think that's kind of everything that there was, yeah. Oh,
Sure.
there's a question about inspiring me. Stuff that wasn't been done before, I guess that's what inspiring me. And seeing more sort of hands-on approach to stuff. That's what's inspiring me lately.
Nice. I love that. Yeah, definitely in a world of automation right now, seeing everyone get in the nitty gritty details, definitely. That's why these sort of webinars are really, really exciting for us on the Mari team as well. I know the Mari team are listening along and definitely excited for us to learn how you guys are using it in context, but for all of us to learn from Rob. Right. So thank you very much to you, Robert, for taking your time, the willingness to be involved in such an in-depth look at the way that you do work and the templates that you use. Like I said, it does make a huge difference. To everyone at home, I did just see that there is a question about Mari being difficult to learn. It is compared to our competition, but don't worry because we have lots of resources available. I see that our lovely team have shared the first day of Mari training form. This is a form that you can absolutely fill out, and we will send you the getting started in Mari content and help you get up and running. There is a Discord channel that we are all available on, Mari team wise, extension pack wise. There are a whole bunch of artists in studios and also individuals who are there. We all love to learn from each other, so please do join us. And there is a lovely, amazing Mari in Minutes video series of very, very short, like 2-3 minute videos of different concepts that starts outside of Mari. So it starts with things like what even is texturing? What is color space? Before we actually go through how to texture in Mari. So it's a really, really good way to get up and running if you are struggling. But you can also always reach out to us. So reach out to us either via the Discord, the support team, or you can feel free to ping me on LinkedIn or anything else, and I'll happily help how I can. If you'd like to see more videos like this, if you would like to perhaps drop a comment, if there are any additional studios that you would like to see similar topics from or introductions from like this, we can definitely maybe see if they happen. We can reach out. But we'd love to do more live streams like this. So please do like and subscribe. And thank you so much for spending the time with us today. Hopefully you'll do it again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.